Press record. Now it's doing
Okay.
this. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Unconventional Therapist Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave, and I'm joined here with my co-host. His name is Greg. What is up, Greg?
Um, it's a loaded question in this dirty
In
little
this in
topic.
this day and age,
Yeah, yeah. So, Dave, I do have.
Greg, I dirty little topic that's very like foreshadowing of this episode. Uh, and probably something that needs to also start to lose some of its perception.
I think
And
in some ways yes, in some ways no. I feel like we're gonna like maybe drift from each other on this, or maybe not. Maybe not at all. I don't know. It's complicated. It's a complicated subject. I'll say that.
yeah, very
I will
complicated.
say something before we get started though. Like there's an update. In addition to my family, we have a bearded dragon.
Oh, you got a bearded dragon?
Yep.
Very
One,
cool.
one of my kids wanted it. It was, and ironically, this is applies to this episode too. Um, but it was either a phone or, we gave him the option, like a phone or you pick anything you want. And like, I didn't really want to give him the phone, and he picked a bearded dragon. We're like, "Pfft,
Why a bearded dragon?
I don't know. I have no idea. But it's cool. It's a
Hmm,
cool little pet. They're kind of like friendly and they get kind of
interesting.
big. So it'll be, it's
Cool.
my first first, like I'm not a huge pet guy except after my dog died after so long, and I like just was like I'm all set. I feel like maybe I'll handle a lizard better. The
I
grieving process is easier, I think.
did you know I used to have frogs
I didn't.
for
No.
like a long time? I had tree frogs.
Oh, interesting.
So, and I actually raised them from like tadpoles into like adult frogs.
Wow, that is.
I had a kid I would work with, and he would bring in like a bucket of tadpoles. And I don't know why, how this even, I don't remember how it came up, but every like summer they would end up in his sister's pool. So
Yeah,
his sister would like save them for me because I don't know why they knew I would want that
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah. I
how
don't
that came up. But I literally would like I would have to find like special food for the tadpoles because obviously they can't eat like insects and stuff yet,
know.
and not all of them would survive. And I would only keep a few that seemed to be like growing the
Real
fastest.
go-getters. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then I would dump the rest in like a pond or something like that. And I had a number of them. Freddy Croker.
Freddy Croker.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to remember some of the other names. But anyways, I accidentally added a wood frog into the tank,
Uh-huh.
and they all got this bacteria disease, and like their legs stopped working, and they died a miserable death. And I never wanted to do it again.
Dude, you pulled like a freaking Miles Standish on them. You introduced disease to the.
Horrible, horrible.
Yeah.
I felt terrible. Like I kid you not, I was legit upset about this.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That sounds
I had
like
them for years.
genocide.
I had them for years. I had a toad. I had a toad at one point in time, and he didn't even like. I didn't think about that stuff, but
Well, you know what,
I learned
Dave?
the hard way.
Sometimes it's intention, right? And that's kind of a difficult segue
Frogs?
to like yeah, into our topic today. Um,
Not really.
no? Okay. Well, I guess there's anything out there you can find. Will
I was
create.
addicted to pets.
Yes, there's some sort of there's something for everybody, we'll say that. So today we're talking about porn addiction.
Pornography addiction.
Yes.
Don't don't short it. You know.
Yeah, oh, okay, so like this is I feel like you're a big advocate at this point.
No, no, just not really. A big advocate for the addiction.
For addiction and porn. I mean, and I think
Okay.
we should separate those two things. So first,
Hmm.
let's talk about what is porn. Because
Okay.
I think that pornography, sorry, excuse me, we'll have to sort of clarify that a little bit because I think that, is it a Playboy magazine? Maybe. Is it Cinemax? Remember back in the day? So,
Skinamax.
yeah, some would say Skinemax, yeah. But then there's like Game of Thrones, which is sort of on the same playing field. You'll see the same amount of, you know, bare parts as you would in Cinemax or Playboy, right? So I think it's important to distinguish, a show like Game of Thrones from pornography because, I mean, it's a form of media, right? But it's produced and designed to create, like, it's explicitly for sexual arousal, I think.
So let me also challenge you with this thought.
Okay.
for the individual person, couldn't the source of pornography be something that's not even intended to be pornography?
So it could be, but the idea is that pornography itself has to fall under the criteria of something that is produced specifically for that. So like if you go on all these porn sites or back in the day when you had to get DVDs or something like that, that was created explicitly for, I
Hmm.
mean, are we bouncing around the word here? Like sexual arousal slash sexual gratification slash
Pleasure, pleasure,
pleasure?
sexual pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. Masturbation? I'm gonna have a hard time with this.
Okay.
A lot of Catholic
But
guilt.
that's part of the problem, I think. That is kind of part of the problem.
Yeah, you might be right.
I
Yeah.
think that there's, and we'll talk about this as we go along, but like the fact that it's so hard to talk about, I think impacts people's ability to actually seek help for this.
Okay. Yes, because there's a stigma around it. Okay, you're going a different way than I
100%.
thought you were. Yeah, no, absolutely. And also there's an element here when it was brought to like the Supreme Court, one of the justices said, "You know it when you see it." And I think there's some truth to that, right?
Oh,
Like
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
like what is it?
You
You'll
know,
know.
when you were describing it though, I was even thinking like as a kid, you would see like this is like something of the past, but they would do like catalogs or
Yeah.
magazines with like people. And I remember like Cheryl T in like a swimsuit or something like that when we were, I'm talking
Yeah.
80s,
Make
obviously,
it
but
Sears
um
catalog was enough when in the 80s. Yeah.
the Sports Illustrated like
Yep.
swimsuit magazine or something along those lines.
The bra section in Caldor.
Yeah.
You know, like anything like that was enough. Think that, which is something that's interesting about this too, which we will talk about because man, they've upped the ante since we were
Oh yeah. Oh
teenagers.
yeah.
Dave, it's funny that you bring up like us being kids and everything. Did you know that the exposure to this, the average exposure age is between 10 and 13? It's like the
Yeah.
first time you're gonna see porn. Is that young?
Is that nudity in general or pornography?
That's that's you're gonna come across pornography, not historically speaking, but like that's a contemporary number because I think of, hey, what does everyone have? Like internet access 24/7. You typically give your kid a phone around 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, right? That's when the kid's gonna get their own phone and they're gonna stumble across this because there's always a kid, even when we were growing up, who just knows a little bit more than the rest of
Oh,
us.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's
and
got some
and you
access.
wonder when we were kids, because I mean we didn't get our first phone until 18, 19,
Yeah.
and it makes you wonder how that kid knew so much back in the day before phones.
There's always someone that knew,
Yeah.
and I remember it. Geez, this is taking me back. I know the kid's name. I think I'll withhold. But he showed me like a hustler, which was pretty intense. And I remember seeing that and being like, that is not what I expected.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. So, in terms of porn, though, we're still kind of talking pornography. We're saying that these are the numbers as far as like who's looking at this. 70 to 80% of men use it regularly, right? 60% of women, which is kind of, is that more or less than you thought?
Way more.
Okay, so it's 60% of women really do.
Actually, 70-80% of men is really high, more than I thought.
Well, 100%, almost 100%, this one psychologist was saying. Like, you can't say 100%, obviously, but in America, nearly 100% of people have seen porn by age 18. So that's today's stats. It didn't used to be like that.
Right.
And I think that's a problem in a lot of ways. I mean, because it's so easy and accessible. And I think like you wanted to mention that later. We used to have to go find this stuff. Like it was in the woods. You heard legends that there was a Playboy in the woods, right? Isn't that like that
No.
was something that,
I never heard that one.
Well, there isn't so these
The
numbers are high.
Playboy in the woods.
It sounds like when I said like 60% of women use porn, like you were kind of like, "Oh, that's seems like a lot." And I think there is an outlier, and that's religious women who are about 20%. But there's like a lot of problems show up in those
I
relationships.
mean, because I only talk to women from Christian Mingle, so
Yeah,
I
exactly. Or
was really
J date.
shocked by that 60%.
Yeah, dude, you're always hanging out with the nuns,
Yeah.
picking up the
Sister
one.
Mary Francis,
Yeah, yeah.
is
He likes a real challenge, and he goes to look for a lady. He goes to the convent. Sister Mary Francis, is that a Sister Act
I think
reference?
she's from Sister Act.
Okay, okay. All right, good job.
Thank you.
Sister Mary Frances. That is exactly right too. Wow. That just really sparked a
That was
memory.
the younger one, right?
Yeah, Sister Mary Frances is the she had the great voice. She had the pipes, but she
Yeah,
was shy.
she was.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dave, I this made me do a lot of thinking and just like a quick little aside here, and maybe you could deep dive into this, but actually the guy my first porn experience, I won't get into it, but we had a friend in the neighborhood, and his father, not father, it was like some guy his mom was dating, would have us all, like this teenage boys, come over, and he'd make us steak and cheeses and french fries. And some of the kids would like sleep over there, and they would watch like pornography there. And the guy like knew and was fine with it. And now
Yeah,
like
but where was he?
he
Was
wasn't
he in the room?
he wasn't in the I don't think he was in the room, but he had a black box.
Oh yeah.
So that shit was going for hours on end. You know what I mean?
No, only a certain time
Yeah, but
frame.
like at night,
Yeah.
basically through the night, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so anyways,
Interesting.
let's get into addiction a little bit here.
Yeah.
Because it's funny that we've never
So
really go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so like the reason we just talked about what pornography is actually to bring to light how common its usage is, even though it's such a taboo subject. It's 60% of women is a large percentage of women, and 70 to 80% of men is gross.
Wait,
We
yeah,
are gross.
yeah, I know. And it's
But
like
no, we're not gross. It's human. And this is kind of highlighting that it's human, and obviously it's something that people are curious about
mm-hmm,
as children.
100% of
Young
people.
children are just yearning for it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's
Greg, they're actually watching it upstairs in your house right now
oh, please no.
with the bearded dragon.
I know, I know. The poor bearded dragon didn't know what he's getting himself into. Let's hope that's not happening because we're oh man, I don't even want to think about it. But let's talk a little bit about addiction because it's ironically like something we haven't really touched on in this podcast, and we're not gonna cover addiction right now, but we should.
No,
We will.
we will. Yeah,
We
that's on the
will.
list. Yeah.
So it's so I didn't look for I kind of tried to define this on my own, and I think it's a compulsive need to do something that interferes with your life goals, and I think there has to be an interference with your values. I think is part of what an addiction is, or maybe not. Maybe I just kind of made that up, but
Yeah, that
porn,
sounds like you made that up.
I did make it up. Porn, though, is it's hard to say that it's addiction sometimes because I think there's actually a term called PPU, and and that stands for problematic porn use. And that's when it causes distress and like, you know,
Yeah.
guilt, right? And you're not loving that you do it. And it kind of brings you down. And it might even be causing some mental health issues, but it's not heroin or cocaine.
Can I go back to the first thing you were talking about
Sure.
so that it interferes with life goals? So I think the most easy and basic way to look at any kind of addictive behavior is it's a problem. I think another way to say it, other than like your life goals, would be it's negatively impacting your everyday functioning and
Mm.
ability to kind of carry out your responsibilities in life, right?
Yes.
That is
Yeah,
when
like
addiction becomes problematic.
right. Yeah, like the cocaine and the heroin, that's you're not getting up for work. Maybe pornography is not doing that to you, but maybe it is, right?
No, yeah, that when we
Because
get
it
into
does happen.
symptoms, we'll talk about that for sure.
Right. Like, and I think that it's less similar to cocaine and heroin, but it is pretty similar to like sports betting and alcohol and cigarettes.
Yep.
But I think alcohol is a pretty parallel one too, because it's like you can age out of alcoholism. I think in a lot of ways I have, where it's like you get to an age where you're like, I can't feel like that
Do
anymore.
you so I think there is uh, a spectrum
Sure.
of addiction levels, and people's place on that spectrum can vary. So, like for you, I think that you might have fallen in a place where your addiction uh, placement on whatever this scale is probably lower than someone who that wasn't possible for. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Because
No,
then
I
that
agree.
I think that kind of highlights like the individuality of addiction as well. Because yeah, I agree with you. There's certain things that I could say like I bordered on problematic,
Okay.
behavior with it.
We're
But
not
for
gonna get into
me,
it, or
no, it's not
okay.
porn. It's not porn addiction, so we don't want to talk about it today. No, but it was like maybe easier for me than it might have been for somebody else, my next door neighbor.
Absolutely. And I feel
Just
like
putting him on blast right
my next neighbor's having a real hard time. Yeah,
there.
no,
He's
you're
having some
right. Like,
problems.
but so I think with alcohol and cigarettes and pornography, something they have in common is there's like a cognitive dissonance where, like, the nurses outside the hospital are smoking cigarettes. That's a cognitive dissonance. There's this
Yeah.
moral incongruity where there is this struggle inside a lot of us where we feel like this is such a bad thing. There's a lot of guilt associated with porn watching. And let me ask you this, Dave. Like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna. Like, is the guilt associated with porn valid?
Hmm.
You know?
Is it valid? Depends what the guilt is for that person. Like, is the guilt about, oh, this is shameful, I shouldn't be watching this because that's something that they were uh a message they received at a younger age? Is it guilt because it took them away from other responsibilities? Is it guilt because it feels very shameful in general, like the idea, the stigma around it is so
Yeah.
shameful, and like they feel guilty or dirty because they were engaging in it? I don't know, it kind of depends on the thought. To say it's invalid is invalidating to the person who's experiencing it, so I can't necessarily say it's valid or invalid. I think that
Yeah.
that's something they would have to work out when they are seeking treatment for it, if they do end up seeking treatment, you know what I mean?
No, totally. And what about the idea of like the sex worker themselves who maybe, had a tough go and this is where they found themselves? And then there's the other spectrum of that where you see like the sex worker who's like maybe like a celebrity
Sex
who's
worker.
is that like a is this
I don't know that we use that term, sex worker. Are you talking about like prostitutes?
no, I'm talking about like is the pornography actress
I
like a
don't know that
or
they call
actor
themselves
a sex
sex
worker?
workers anymore. I think that's
Is
actually
that
kind of
dated?
changed over time because of how mainstream, and they've built more awareness to that
Hmm.
industry. So I do think that they I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe
I
that
find
is
myself
how
a
it's
dinosaur a lot of the time. Yeah.
um I do I actually think that there's been a large wave of trying to build like awareness, acceptance, and normalcy to the industry. Whether that's good or bad, I don't think it's for me to say. I can definitely
Yeah.
have some opinions that I don't know necessarily need to be shared in this episode itself. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know that that necessarily. It's so tough. Like, who are we to put judgment
I know.
on
That's the thing.
people's choices, if as long as they're not causing direct harm, intentional harm to people? But then we know that some people can struggle with addiction. But that's the same thing as like saying, is a brewer, should are they shameful for brewing beer knowing that people struggle with alcoholism? I don't think so. I enjoy
I
beer.
don't
I
think
enjoy
so.
breweries. So who would I'd be a hypocrite to say yes to that.
Yeah,
I also work with people with alcoholism. So like that's a very strange dynamic that we find ourselves in.
I
But
know.
that's such is life, right?
Such is life, right? I mean, it's very nuanced, we'll say.
Absolutely.
So
Um,
I'm gonna be interested, like, and then I'm gonna let you like take off here for a little
yeah,
bit. But the I am interested to hear you talk a little bit about symptoms later on because to me this has always been like a spiritual or a moral point of view, whether or not like it was an appropriate thing to be doing. But I'm interested to hear like, are there any like real
yeah,
consequences, Like,
yeah. And this is something that I think I've been aware of from listening, like kind of like lightly touching on this subject previously. Maybe a weird term to use, but just like
slight.
doing some light research
Yeah.
previously. But
Okay.
now that we did this deep dive, I was like, oh yeah, no, there is a lot here that's pretty like actually serious. And actually I do remember why I've looked at this previously. I had a patient who kept telling me he had sex addiction,
Mhm.
and it included pornography as well. But it was like, and I've talked to you about this patient before. It's a pretty wild case, and I'm not going to get into it here. But I as he was talking about it, I was more and more, I was like, this sounds more like you're addicted to like porn and fetishes than it is the actual act of sex itself. So, but I mean, there's some similarities here. I do think you might even consider them two separate things, maybe sex addiction and pornography addiction. I'm not sure. I think there's maybe a case to be made for including or separating them. But I did look a little briefly, and obviously we did this deep dive. And the craziest thing to me though is that it's not in the DSM.
Yeah.
So the diagnostic something manual, whatever,
Yeah.
it's still not in there. But we have other things like excessive internet use, internet gambling, and I think there's even like video game addiction. Um, there's maybe caffeine addiction, right? Aren't they even
Yeah.
mentioned in there and like
Absolutely.
tentatively going to be added into the
They
next
get honorable
DSM?
mentions.
Yeah. But then pornography addiction is not in there. So that's sort of interesting to hear. Um, it's this really taboo thing, right? And I would imagine that makes it like super hard for people who are struggling with this to feel comfortable to come forward to seek help, right?
Yeah, it probably does make it super hard.
See, I would never tell you, Greg. I would never tell you if I were someone that would. If you were my therapist, I'd be like, I'm not sharing that with him. He's gonna make a joke.
Yeah, no, no, this is like actually, I'm actually very interested in this. And I didn't know that it wasn't a part of the DSM. I kind of just assumed that it was. Um,
As far as I'm aware, it is not in the DSM-5.
that actually makes sense. There's not a ton of study on this
Yeah.
because there's not a lot of time to like pornography was something for a very long time. It's kind of like always been a part of, society. But the way it is now, it's a completely different thing where people it's almost replaced. I think never in the past has it had a chance to almost replace the necessity to seeking out romantic
Oh,
relationships. You know what I mean?
there's unlimited access to
Yeah.
it too. It's which is crazy. And the adult industry itself has become way more mainstream, right? It's like,
Hmm.
you see porn stars on social media, you see them in movies, you see them interviews with, your favorite podcast hosts, whatever.
Yep.
Um, but the interesting thing is, so the world is shifting its view of the people in the industry, right? But is
Yes.
the world changing its perception of the people who actually view it?
That's a wildly fascinating question.
Think about that. Like, don't we still like if somebody was like came out and told you, hey, I just watched a bunch of porn, you'd be like, you'd
I'm
probably
uncomfortable.
have a negative thought about them, right?
I think that
Even
even
if
if you're
you engaged in it
someone,
yourself.
yes, like even if you were just like in your mind, you're like me too. You'd be like, what the heck?
You're a pervert. You would say
Yes.
something along those lines,
Yeah,
right?
I think
It's
so.
this wild dynamic, I think. And like, how do we how do we look at the people in the industry more graciously, but then still have such a harsh view of people that engage in it? I just find that to be a very wild dynamic that we have in
Well,
society.
we romanticize like heroin use and like things like that through.
There's no romanticizing porn use, right?
Yeah.
There's no movie about like Johnny Depp like as like
Oh,
a
you're
porn
right.
addiction like
I know.
person,
Oh, I
looking
will.
at
I
him
will
in like
say
this.
though, that movie about the Wonderland murders is pretty solid.
Yeah, yep,
Hmm.
yep.
But
I
like,
I don't know that I remember.
it wasn't
I
an.
I saw it a long time ago. It's Val Kilmer. I know as John. I was like John Holmes, and
And it's not a great light, and Dirk Diggler and Boogie Nights is a great movie, and that's
again, it's like that dirty,
it is.
gritty,
It is.
uncomfortable. But it's all about that's about the industry people, right? Again, it's
And
not about like the viewers.
but do you feel like that's warranted? I almost feel it would be really hard for me to shake that for myself. You know what if like I don't know if I would want to live in a world where everyone was just so upfront about,
I don't know either. I
you
don't
know?
know that I would either. I'm not. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying is like I'm not saying that I'm advocating that we should look at it differently.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting dynamic that
Yeah, no, it is.
that
You're just pointing
exists.
out that that exists.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right. So why do people use pornography in like ways that can become addictive? I guess.
I think I
Um.
know.
All right. In ways that could become addictive.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. I think you know why people use pornography in general. All right. So there's two major issues. Dopamine and avoidance. So the dopamine part of this is all right. So people, just so you're aware, dopamine is a chemical that's released in the brain. It's very important in moving. So the thing that we always learned was too little dopamine is Parkinson's disease, and too much you become schizophrenic. Right? That's
Yeah.
I remember Dr.
Balance.
Bovee teaching us that
Balance is everything.
balance is everything. But the other thing is dopamine releases a part into another part of the brain as well, which is the emotion center of the brain, and it ties in with the experience of reward, motivation, and pleasure. So it's also to be considered to be connected with this the late pathways of reinforcing drugs and behavior, things like that. So some research highlights dopamine may be more important in the process of motivation than actual pleasure, meaning
Yeah.
that the motivation to get something versus the pleasure once we've actually gotten it. So if you think about that with like porn addiction and the drive to watch or to try to achieve an orgasm, it's actually the addiction is actually more about that drive and the
Yeah.
dopamine that they're getting about the thinking about porn, thinking about, achieving their and all the things that, are involved in that
Mhm.
versus that actual feeling of once they've finished. You know what
Yes.
I mean?
So yeah, no, I do know what you mean. It's like your behavior patterns change to suit the pathway to get the pleasure. So so seeking pleasure, we've talked about this 1,000 times. This pleasure itself should be this happy consequence of value-based action we talk about all the time, like living your life in a way that's like you're living in accordance with your values, and everything once in a while like some pleasure happens and that's great, right? And then that value-based action is selected for, and that's where the dopamine comes from, right? You doing
Yeah.
something value-based and you get dopamine for that. So in that framework, like that's kind of ideal, right? But pleasure seeking, the action taken to get the pleasure, so like the doing nothing, the scrolling, the typing on the phone, the sitting in your room in the dark, that action becomes rewarded for, and you start to do that more
Yeah.
and more, and essentially you become this slug,
Right.
and that's kind of like the problem there. It's like hijacking the dopamine system, like you're talking about, which happens. So you're just kind of making the case in a smart way where like, oh no, this is an addiction.
It is. It
Yeah,
is. All right. So, just as we are describing this, I just thought about think about people who are like, what would you say, kleptomaniacs?
sure.
It's more about the thrill of or the dopamine you get
Hmm.
from trying to obtain the object versus once you've obtained it, you're not satisfied. You're going to do
Uh-uh.
it all over again. And the
You,
same thing happens with porn addiction. Once you finish and then have that weird change in your mind where you're like, oh, why did I do that?
yeah, I'm gross.
And then like 20 minutes later you're back to your normal self. um then you're just going to do it all over again. And guess what? You're never going to be satisfied. You're always going to be seeking that. It's kind of like, actually, it is kind of like cocaine, I guess, when you're just constantly
Totally.
changing it, but you need more and more as you go along. It's not just going to be the same amount. You're going to be seeking more of it.
You need more. Yeah.
So it becomes this snowball effect. And that's where I think the addiction piece really comes to light is
Oh,
when
I see.
people are taking now what maybe started as I only need 5 minutes
Hmm.
of this time with pornography. Now it's taking hours.
And you're building a tolerance in a
And
sense
you're
too.
building a tolerance. Your neural pathways are changing,
Uh-huh.
right? The brain chemistry is all changing from this
And
behavior.
and you become this like really kind of sad anhedonia, right? With the opposite of
Right.
hedonistic, where
Eh,
it's like you can only become so happy because you know what I mean? Like you need more and
right.
more and more. And that thing that you need more of, it doesn't actually exist in society. So like if there was like
No.
the
Yeah.
the most handsome dude ever 100 years ago, like, I don't know, whoever, an awesome guy, like, Ernest Hemingway or someone, I can't even think of someone who I think is like super handsome, awesome, Clark Gable, right? He's, you can
James
see
Dean.
now more beautiful, ridiculously beautiful naked women in like seconds than he did in his entire life. And he was awesome. So, like, you don't, the meaning and like the pursuit, like all that's kind of taken away. And so it's kind of this empty pleasure too.
Super empty. Now, do you
Yeah.
see how this is all science, chemistry, like
Yeah.
body chemistry?
Oh yeah.
This is why I do make the valid argument that this should be treated as a diagnosis,
Yeah, as an addiction,
as
Yeah.
an addiction, be included in DSM. I truly believe it. Just kind of understanding it in this way, it
Hmm.
functions as every other addiction.
Sure
This is
does.
just like video game addiction. It
I think
and
it's worse.
it
That's way
it's
more.
worse
It's way.
because of, yeah, you're engaging in something that, like we said, is so taboo, is can become so problematic in relationships. I
Hmm.
mean, all these addictions can, but this one feels like it has a different connotation, and it's unfortunately because of the stigma, because of the taboo, you can't just like, you're not gonna, you could go to your friends and be like, guys, I got video game addiction, and they may
Yeah,
be like, yeah, dude, me too.
I know.
You're not gonna go to your friends and be like, dude, I got porn addiction. They're like,
They're like,
you
huh,
you don't have a, why don't you just get a girlfriend, or they'll have like
totally.
some stupid thing, and then you feel shame and embarrassment, right?
And you just want to get help.
Right. The other part of this, which I think is also super huge,
Okay.
is for some people, porn addiction has is basically, it's a maladaptive coping skill that they developed at some point in time that serves as avoidance to what some sort of uncomfortable feeling. And
Okay.
this has become their new way of dealing, or it's become their way of dealing with the uncomfortable feeling, and now it's the only way they know how to deal with the uncomfortable feelings. And it also, because of the way the dopamine hits and things like that, it probably reinforces it and makes it
Yeah.
stronger. But some things that people might be looking to avoid, maybe boredom, maybe being tired or drowsy, so like right before bed they might start to engage in it. Maybe they get stressed, um, or other unpleasant or difficult feelings like anxiety, sadness, anger, depression,
Yeah, it's like any
loneliness.
other like maladaptive coping strategy. It's like at one point this worked and it was useful, and then your brain, like whenever you're feeling that emotion, that strong emotion again, your brain's like, well, geez, like how did I fix that before? Oh, I did this thing, and then it just kind of you get
Right.
caught in that like almost like obsessive compulsive loop.
Now, think about what we talked about with accessibility.
Yeah.
Now, think about how, so like, all right, if you and I got stressed and, like a stereotypical thing people talk about doing is like they're going to have a cigarette, right? You even
Mhm.
mentioned like nurses might go outside and have a cigarette if they had a stressful shift. Or somebody might have a drink, or do some other kind of like substance, right? But you sort of have to like do that in a controlled way. Like you can't
Yeah.
just in the middle, like midday, if you have a bunch of responsibilities, you can't just go, all right, now I'm gonna go knock back a whiskey before I go pick up the kids or something. Like, well, some people maybe do, but you probably shouldn't do that. It could impact your life pretty significantly. However, you
Hmm.
could engage in this. It's super accessible, probably wouldn't impair you for the whole day. It would start off as something maybe sort of quote unquote innocent,
Hmm.
and could spiral into just the way that you deal with any of
Everything.
those uncomfortable things, right? Or anything that comes your way. And now you have a real problem because you don't know how to deal with human feelings and emotions without
Yeah,
using
and
porn.
I wonder if it has an effect on like your ability to have just regular sex.
Okay, so let me get into the symptoms because
Okay.
yeah. So symptoms of porn addiction: obsessive viewing, and inability to stop. I think those two things are maybe
Yeah.
feel kind of like they would go hand in hand. But I mean, people can spend hours consuming porn the same way people, like we talked about with video game addiction. I hate to keep bringing up different addictions, but I just think it kind of needs to be said that it functions similar to a lot of things. People play video games, say they don't even notice how long they're playing, and suddenly it's been a few hours. Neglecting daily life. So maybe they're watching for so long that they forget to do certain things, or they lose time in the day to do things. Reduce sexual satisfaction. It can actually reduce intimacy in relationships, which might seem contradicting. I think people think of people with porn addiction as just being like very, for lack of better words, horny all the time or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But it's not serving that way. It's not because they're constantly aroused and they need some fix. It's like I said, it's more of like a coping skill, or they're seeking that dopamine, than it is that they're like just so worked up and aroused that they need it. um and the other issue is they may only get arousal after watching porn, and they might not be able to get arousal from having intimacy with their partner. which can obviously then cause significant relationship issues. They may have declined attraction to their partner. They may just start to begin comparing their partner and mentally to, things they viewed, things like that, and it can decrease the attraction levels. Um, they might have excessive spending on pornography. Some people pay for it, I guess, which
Yeah.
seems old fashioned in today's
Right. Yeah.
today's
Yeah.
society. And pain in joints and body. So obvious, I think the more obvious one is the
This is
wrists
where we're
and
getting
hands,
serious.
but
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
like back pain, headaches from the excessive viewing, things like that. So it actually has a psychological and can have a physical impact on your health.
Yeah, and like there, I can even talk about more consequences, like
Sure.
kind of more like nuanced ones. It's like when you think of like the sex scripts that people develop from this. It's when you think of like a movie, the way like a fight scene goes in like John Wick or like the old kung fu movie. Remember like the Ninja Turtle movies?
Yeah.
And like you'd be like, why doesn't someone just shoot them? Or why don't they all attack at once, right? So it's like the way that a fight scene in a movie is so fake. It's kind of like similar to the way like a sex scene is in porn, where it's like when young kids are looking at this, it becomes like really weird, like expectations, you know?
That's that honestly, what you just said right there is my biggest concern for youth watching excessive amounts of pornography or having just this, access that wasn't available years ago. They're watching it and there's not a lot of education towards them because of how taboo the subject is, especially with minors. So they are having a harder time probably differentiating what's reality, what's not reality,
Yeah.
or even just understanding that these are parody
Yeah, like it's not
conversations and
real.
dialogues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like I feel like there was a lot, like we understood that. So, and the truth is, there's like a violence piece here too, where even in
right.
colleges, 2/3 of females report unwanted choking, which goes back to these sex scripts. Like this is something
Yeah,
that's constantly happening. They see this in the pornography, and they think, oh, like I get it. Like this is a part of the whole thing,
sure.
and it's like almost a subconscious noting that, oh, women like to be like violence and they like degradation. They like to be
Yeah.
like treated
And what's
really
crazy is
nasty.
like we also, as a society, don't always consider our individuals who aren't neurotypical
Yeah.
learners. So like as we've talked about numerous times, like I work with a population like, a lot of them on the autism spectrum or have developmental disabilities. And it's crazy to hear like how hard it is for some of them to understand that that's not real life. I'm actually like one of the individuals I work with at our office is like, I think he's like 16 and he let me know that he's been watching excessive
Mhm.
amounts and the way he talks it does feel like he thinks it thinks it's reality and it's a conversation that like actually is less awkward with him because he's just so direct and everything's so
Yeah.
black and white that's kind of a benefit but still can be kind of scary. And then I was also thinking of oh, I just had a fleeting thought. I'll come back to it, never mind.
Sometimes they get away from us. But
They
I
do.
got an interesting thing to say. Like
Sure.
there's this thing that this test or study that they did with the stickleback fish. And this fish, it's like this cool thing where like they have a little red dot on them. I might have talked to you about this. And it makes the other male fish go absolutely wild when they see this thing. They can't handle it. And so scientists do like intruding, like they always do. They made this thing a lot bigger, and it made the other male stickleback fish like completely insane and like they're like because it doesn't exist in the natural world. It's like violating some like unwritten laws, and I feel
Mm,
like that kind of really relates to pornography because this these are not real situations, and I think that it's almost like a thought form where like maybe this is becoming realistic situations because of the pornography. And where did the pornography script come from? Is this like something that's subconscious in everybody? Like it's just like a really kind of a dark thing, but
yeah,
I don't know. I think that's one of the biggest contributors to like the danger of it,
sure.
you
I
know?
actually remember my thought.
Okay.
Only because you've brought up these novels before, but we talked about I think it's Chad Colkin, is that his name? Who did
Yeah.
Average American Male, Men, Women, and Children is another novel they did. I think it was Men, Women, and Children, where the man gets like he has an affair with a younger girl, and I think it ultimately ends up getting divorced. But when he's having the affair with a younger girl, she's way more sexually explorative, or
Yeah.
his interactions with her are so feel so foreign to him, and then it dawns on him that, oh wow, her whole generation grew up watching pornography,
Hmm.
and her awareness of sex and these acts and like all the things that they were doing was so much broader than women, or his wife and women that he had were more his
Yeah.
age, because just he was older. I just thought that was such a weird thought, and it's like it just makes you think: is that good? Is that bad? I don't
I
know.
know it does it feel like exploitation of something that's supposed to be like intrinsically like
Right,
beautiful
right.
and like almost sacred, and the exploitation of it is like a really kind of dark thing, I think.
It's really an interesting like thing that I don't think we talk about a lot in society, because we are so focused on not being, of what do I want to say here? Not offending, and we want to like be very accepting, but sometimes there does feel like we avoid moments where maybe there should be some pushback, when I don't feel like we're protective enough of our youth at times, and like
Yeah.
how they're developing, and that bothers me. I do want everybody to be able to be themselves and have experiences, but there are some things that I think that we don't consider their development and how
Yeah.
they internalize things, and that scares me a little bit
Yeah, like things are a little too over the top. So
sometimes. Yeah.
yeah. So Dave, like let's talk a little bit about treatment. The
Okay.
old the old standard, I think, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's the same for anything you read. Is the first thing is always going to be cognitive behavioral therapy, right? But I actually do think that's valid in this case. So helping people identify and change their negative thoughts and behaviors could be very helpful in this one, especially when we're talking about that avoidance piece of it. Um, and just kind of developing new coping skills to, or ways to work through things
Hmm.
a little easier, rather than just reverting back to pornography use all the time. But it will take active participation to understand the reasons you're using it, right?
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
Support groups, I think, are an interesting thing for this, and I do see how this could be beneficial, because I think, like I mentioned before, I imagine it's very tough for people to be open about this, and I also assume it must be a very lonely thing to feel, like, because you start to have that like you might isolate yourself or have shame around the behavior. So when you are able to connect with others who struggle with it and are actively trying to work on the issue, I would imagine that must feel pretty empowering.
Yeah, and it's also that's probably helpful too because people like when you're seeking help for a pornography addiction, people might even do the opposite thing where they're like, "Really? That's an addiction? Like, come on, just stop."
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's almost they would invalidate that, I
I'm
think.
gonna be honest with you. I initially found myself doing that when that patient I mentioned previously told me he felt like he had a sex addiction. I found myself, and this is horrible to say, I didn't say it out loud, but I found myself pushing back to the idea and wondering if he was using that as an excuse to justify
Yeah.
some of the behaviors he was engaging in.
Yeah, like I can't stop now. I'm addicted.
Right. And that was actually a thought I had a long time ago, when I had heard like a celebrity came out with a sex addiction statement, followed by like he had been caught cheating or
Yeah,
something like that. And it just feels like an easy way out, right? So I think in my head, I then started to associate that with almost any time I would hear it. Like, I don't even know if I truly believe that for some people. But the more I read on it, the more I understand it, the more I can understand how, yes, this does feel very real.
it does.
So I apologize if I ever minimized anybody's addiction in the past.
But then part of us, our job is like seeing through some of that stuff too, right? And like bringing
Sifting
people,
through the bullshit for
yeah,
sure.
sifting through the
And I
bullshit.
think I was doing a little bit of that as well, because I do think there was a little bit of bullshit, but then there was definitely some very valid things that were in there. Psychodynamic counseling, and we rarely talk about that as a way
Hmm.
to like solve or help treat people. So this is interesting. So trying to identify the deep rooted issues and kind of working with the person on it, I do see how that could be beneficial because like I mentioned, like almost feel with some people this is probably a behavior that they learned very early on and they utilized to deal with emotions, and then it
Yeah.
just became this thing that just kind of like took over.
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see like acceptance commitment therapy because it's almost like committing to a values-based action is like what like a the real antidote to this in a lot of ways, you know?
So I'm accepting that I use porn
It's right.
23 out of the 24 hours a day.
I'm okay with that. You know?
it's, it's
It's
part
just
of
who
my
I am.
ACT,
That's who
guys.
I've been, you know?
Part
And
of my ACT treatment.
so
Um, and it's just to mention also medication.
sure.
If you're using it to avoid, or to not feel anxious, depressed, things like that. And then there's also like porn addiction counseling specific counselors, I guess. So kind of seeking that on your own. Kind of seeking a counselor that specializes in it. I would imagine that would be super helpful just to have someone who understands
Yeah,
and is not going to be judgmental.
at
I
all.
and I did hear this interesting thought too for people who maybe try to work on this alone and not with the help of a counselor, which obviously I'll, encourage people to get help from a counselor. But if you want to try it on your own, they recommended that you abstain for at least a period of 30 days. And that was just to kind of work through some of that dopamine and I
Yeah.
guess kind of like help the brain kind of adjust back to the lack of
Yeah, like
that
a
dopamine.
dopamine fast. You know,
Yeah.
I've
Yep.
seen that with different. I'm actually thinking about doing that with my phone.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe almost like intermittent fasting with my phone. I've been thinking about doing. We'll
I thought
see.
you already had been doing it for a long time. That's why you never posted or did anything on our social media.
That's true.
Burn.
That was a nice burn. You're right. Good job. Okay, I walked into that one.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, I think like that's actually a pretty cool thing. 30 days. That's is it used to. I used to feel like it was 2 weeks. I think that was the
So
old
this
knowledge.
this person that I was getting that information for didn't feel like 2 weeks was long enough because they
Okay.
actually mentioned the 2 week period, and they felt like, and this was a very like strict process that they had because they actually had a few other things that I didn't bother mentioning, but like even just like not lying for 30 days at all, even like white lies,
Like
nothing.
liar, liar. I got Jim
just
Carrey
just
into a
trying
lot
to
of
live
trouble.
just trying to live a very upfront, open, and honest life for at least 30 days to try to work through some of this. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look
That's a
more
whole
into all
long
that.
conversation that I think I would like push back on a lot. But I think quitting pornography for 30 days is completely appropriate.
Yeah.
Not lying for 30 days. But like, you know, oof, that would be tough. Like just being completely honest with everyone. Like even if
I
like
mean, is there
gonna hurt
dopamine
them.
related release in lying?
Yeah, because it's an avoidance, obviously, right? I mean, like it's like I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to tell them when they
So
ask me, "Do I look good right now?"
yeah, so I guess they're trying to
They're going
limit,
for it.
yeah, really eliminate any. But I would say the yeah, like we said, the abstaining from pornography for 30 days, I think that's reasonable.
All right, I want to try to like rip through a few things because I know like this has actually been really fun to talk about. The religion thing's interesting. I'll say that. Like that's a piece that people, if they're interested in that, can look into where there's something about religion that can really control your behavior and make I don't I think sometimes in a not so good way, but sometimes in a great way. Like, it's a, the morality that can provide is a really interesting thing to me. Like it's values based and I like that. So I was also surprised to learn that modern couples, this is kind of a trend, use porn together. Interesting. I haven't
What happens if they both get addicted to it?
I know. And they don't even need each other. They're just kind of there. They're both there.
They're just watching it and they're like looking at each other like, ugh.
I know you're gross. I'm gross. Like, what's happening? You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
just feel all kinds of bad. And there's something really dangerous that's going on where there's this AI. I hadn't heard about this till today either, where you can have a girl or a guy who will like kind of do whatever you say virtually, and they'll never fight with you, but they'll also like say really nice things about you and always kind of like love what you're saying and doing. And I don't know. That's really
So I
comfortable.
actually didn't know like what this was all about, but I heard recently like a tagline or a headline for a news article basically saying that the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix
I haven't seen it.
was now real. And that's like, I love that movie. I've always kind of thought that that felt like something that's probably going to end up happening, and it's not. I don't think it's great. So it's this he gets a voice, and there's this new thing in the world where you have a little like earbud
Yeah.
and you talk to an AI person, and you can date them, and he dates Scarlett Johansson's AI voice in
And
the
it's just the
movie.
voice.
Yeah, and he talks to her all day long, and he does things with her, and they go on dates. It's just her voice. He breaks up with her at one point. She gets into a new relationship with another AI. It's wild. You got to watch Her. It's a great movie, in my opinion, at least. I think
Mm.
it's wild,
I'm
just because I
impervious
think
to that.
it's so realistic that it feels
No,
like that
yeah,
could
that's
happen.
happening literally right now. But the earbuds never stay in my ears, so it could never happen to me. Let me ask you this: You're in a relationship. Is I'm not asking you personally. I'm just asking you what you think. Is pornography cheating?
I have heard both sides of this,
Me too.
and it's funny. I actually just had this conversation at our work recently,
Hmm.
um, because I have an individual who was getting that pressure from his partner,
Yeah.
and he views it very different than her. And yeah, I mean, how do you? So I think the bigger thing is, it's probably a question you need to have with your partner so you know their stance. So if you engage in it, you know how they're going to respond, right? Because
Yeah.
I think it becomes that thing that you've been talking about. I think it's all value based
Yeah. I think that like unspoken like requirements are, there's some quote that's something along those lines where it's like unspoken expectations are premeditated
arguments,
resentments, I guess.
resentments.
Yeah. So like it is a conversation that you should have. Um, And if being open and especially at the beginning of the relationship, it's really kind of important to nail this stuff down because for some people, like you said, like for some people, this is like it for sure is cheating, and then for some people, it'd be like like I've seen movies where like it's actually a Kevin Hart movie. I can never think of like what it is. There's a million of them, but like his wife like walks on and he's like on an iPad, clearly like the implications there, right? And she like kind of laughs and is like, "Ew, you're gross," and like kind of like leaves. No big deal. But then obviously there's the other side of that where people are like, that's definitely cheating.
Yeah,
Like, what are
yeah.
you doing? That's bad news. So,
And again, I think it's all individual, and everybody has the right to feel however they feel. I think the argument I've heard most from, usually from men, is it's not like I'm having an emotional connection with someone. It's not like
Mhm.
I'm feeling any kind of feelings towards them. I'm just viewing, and it's funny
Not
because
an awful argument.
it's not, and women feel like you're looking at another person the way that you should be looking at me, and that makes me feel like you know
Not an awful argument.
yeah, it's
You
I
know?
can see both sides,
Yeah,
and
no,
i
it's
i
it's
just
both kind of works.
I think the couple, and I know I'm using um men and women because this could be same sex relationships, for sure. They just need to have the conversation, and that's it.
That's it. That's
Make
it.
sure you're both on the same page, or at least that you can accept each other's terms.
So, Dave, I think that about wraps it up for that.
Yeah,
But you had a
this
little
was
announcement.
this was a listener recommendation, and I'm not going to say the listener's name because I don't want to lie. But actually, he wasn't requesting it necessarily for himself. He was requesting it for the help for a friend, quote unquote.
As you would say.
I do actually believe him because he gave a little just you know he's recommended a ton of things in the past too. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful for him, and hopefully everybody else kind of enjoyed this conversation. I just have two house cleaning things I want to say and an update. So we have our Patreon and we have our Apple subscribe services going on. We are as of the release of this episode, we're going to have 2 bonus episodes available. And as we keep saying every week, we're going to continue to make those available and, try to increase the frequency of them. So, if you're interested in getting those bonus episodes, you do have to become a subscribe or Patreon member. You can choose whichever platform you want. So it's either on Apple or to go to the Patreon site for that.
And is this right, Dave? There's no ads on Patreon as well?
I have no idea.
Okay. I
I
don't
don't
think
know
there
why.
is.
I don't know if that's true or not. I can't say.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna listen on
That's
Patreon.
probably false.
Really?
Yeah, it's just yeah.
Oh, it just carried over. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I
Well,
do want to say thank you to our new Patreon subscriber. His name is Tim Sterling. He sounds like an amazing person from that name.
yeah, Sterling. I love
Very, very
I,
cool.
I love him. And
Yeah,
because of him,
awesome.
we will record a bonus episode tonight, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah. I
on.
want to make sure this
Yeah,
person
it's
has
on
a
now.
couple of things to listen to.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Tim Sterling, for joining Patreon. And we'll send you a little something as soon as we get it
Yep.
to send to you. But soon enough, I promise. All right. Yeah, so there's that. Also, same spiel every week. Please rate, review, all that good stuff. I did want to share one little sad thing, and I left it for the end, so I didn't put like a damper on the episode. Or I mentioned previously in an episode about my neighbor who lives across the street, my friend. His name's Patrick, not the neighbor I was talking about with the alcoholism. That's my other neighbor.
Yep.
No, this was Patrick. He was a great guy. I mentioned he had brain cancer. And that started around July. I can't remember when I first mentioned that on here. It was a while ago now. Super sad to say Patrick passed away last
Sorry,
week.
dude.
So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that. I knew actually, I just figured since I had already mentioned it on here, I wanted to update people in case they heard that story and they were wondering or,
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't want to leave it unended. So St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow as of recording this. And he's an Irish Patrick, so it's going to be a day of remembrance for his family. We were kind of hoping that he was going to make it at least to St. Patrick's Day, but unfortunately, he held out as long as he could. But he was able to go peacefully at home. I guess that's the best case scenario, but ultimately, he is no longer suffering, and it is probably the best thing for him because it was a really rough go. Brain cancer is a really terrible thing. So
Yeah.
just wanted to share that information, and obviously, you know,
Sorry, Dave.
let people know. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate
If you
that.
ever need to talk, buddy, uh, you know.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and yeah, so we'll be back next week. Like I said, this episode is going to release on Tuesday, the day after St. Patrick's Day. So hopefully everybody is recovering nicely from their Monday St. Patrick's Day shenanigans, if they're even having them. Sucks when it's on a weekday, but
Yeah, Monday of all days.
yeah, it's kind of the worst.
Yeah.
But
Damn.
all right. Well, everybody have a great night, day, morning, whenever you're listening, and we will see you next week. Peace
See you
out.
next week.